Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our session on Competitive Blueprint for India at 100. To begin this session, may I call upon Mr. R. Dinesh, President-Designate CII, to kindly present the welcome and introductory remarks.
Good afternoon to everyone. At the outset, I think I would like to introduce the members on this panel. I think we have a regrettable absence in Ms. Smita Dabra not being able to attend because she's been taken, she's unwell. But we have a fantastic panel in front of you. We have Mr. Vinay Chatterjee, who is the founder and managing trustee of the InfraVision Foundation. I'm not going to get into details of each of their introductions because they are too, I would call it, richly experienced to cover each of that. Of course, we have Mr. Mukundan, Managing Director and CEO of Tata Chemicals, and Kamal Bali, who is the President and Managing Director of Volvo Group. And we have a great pleasure in also welcoming Dr. Christos Kabolis, who is the Chief Economist and Head of Operations of the IMD World Competitiveness Index. And you're going to hear more about him on what is the work he has been doing in terms as to the competitiveness index which has been developed by them. I think as far as the focus of this session is concerned, as has been mentioned, as we move from this proud achievement of the 75 years of India to the focus for the future for the next 25 years and India at 100, which not only is a CII focus but as well as the government's focus, the question before us is how do we prepare ourselves for this journey? I think the focus has been initially on the ease of doing business, and as we have moved forward, we are now focusing on the cost of doing business being combined with the ease of doing business to enable the future of India to be not only competitive but also be, I would call it, best in class globally. As we look at that, I see there are four broad pillars under which this momentum can be maintained and momentum can be sustained. The first is on the infrastructure side. And when we speak about the infrastructure side, it not just speaks about, I would call it, the hardcore infrastructure, which is the highways, the ports, the airports, and the various, I would call it, power sector and various activities which are related to those. But equally and most importantly is how do we make sure that all the necessary connectivity is being provided using the software infrastructure on that. And that's where I would call it the utilization of this infrastructure becomes very important. All of us are aware and know the pitfalls which we faced when we looked at the public-private partnership in the infrastructure side based upon the various assumptions which had been taken for growth. But I think as we go forward, the question will be how do we make sure utilization is best in class and how do we make sure that develops a competitiveness barrier in itself for the future. The second issue is in terms of how do we benchmark the usage of this infrastructure. And I think pardon me if any of you have heard this before, but one of the points I had been mentioning was leave aside what is happening with the rest of the world. If you look at an ability to benchmark what happens in India itself, and all of us know, for example, maybe Mumbai airport has maybe the highest density of landings and takeoff, which is equivalent to or better than anywhere else in the world. But why cannot that happen in, say, all the other airports in India? So starting with that as a benchmark to if I look at the benchmarks in the ports or benchmarks in the way in which the utilization of tolls are happening, I think that can itself differentiate us going forward. The last and the most important is the digitization initiative, which can bring all of this together. And that's cutting across, I would say, various sectors, various themes, and last but not the least, equally important, cutting across the ability to prepare our people and upgrade them to the necessary requirements of a globally competitive economy. As you look at from India's focus on being part of global or integrated with the global supply chains, it becomes equally important that we keep I would call it talking about what we have been able to do and making sure that gets reflected in a benchmark index which is independently verifiable and measured. And as all of us know, we have been moving up in the rankings, but the target is not to be able to move up, but to be amongst the top 5 sooner rather than later. So with that as the background, I would start by asking the individual speakers to cover their points for between 5 to 7 minutes each, post which I think we will have a question and answer session with not only from the audience, but also if any speakers within themselves want to ask anything else to the others, we'll be delighted to do so. So with that, let me now request Vinayak to start. So with that, we will request you to talk through the session.
Thank you, Dinesh. You've already done the stage setting for me because you listed infrastructure as the opening curtain raiser for the talk. And I'm just going to use my 5 minutes to just give you a broad framework of how India sees its infrastructure aiding the competitiveness of its economy. And I just want you to focus on 3 buckets. First is build, 2 is connect, and third, as you beautifully said, is utilize. Build, connect, utilize. This is the story of the progress of Indian infrastructure today. So far as build is concerned, all of you who read the daily papers and keep in touch with the infra story know that roads is a great story, not just national highways, but state highways, and right down to the village level, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, border roads, etc., etc. So roads, building roads is something I'm not going to take too much time on. It's well known. Ports have seen a dramatic increase both in terms of their capacity to handle tonnage as well as their efficiencies, largely measured often in what is called Asta, which is the turnaround time of a ship, which was earlier 8-9 days, is down to about 1.5 to 2 days now. Railways has seen, I mean, you're all reading about Vande Bharat and the passenger, the revolution in passenger movements, but equally strong is the dedicated freight corridors. The western one, which is almost near completion, and the eastern, Ludhiana to Calcutta, which will serve the iron ore coal belt. So the railways are, in terms of build, and including reaching almost 100% electrification, the railways are doing a phenomenal job in terms of build. And finally, I also want to talk about regional air connectivity, which handles issues like perishable fruits, vegetables, etc. 200 new airports with Udan and regional connectivity. So the broad story on build is well known. Indian infrastructure is rolling out its build mode, and that's certainly leading to one major thrust on the competitiveness of the Indian economy. Let me come to the second bucket, which is connect. There is basically on connect, you just need to understand that there is probably the most powerful public program in the world in our structuring what is called Gati Shakti. Gati Shakti is a platform which is about 1,300 layers. If you use the Google map in your car, that's a one-dimensional model. You just kind of, one plane model. It's two-dimensional, it's one plane, where on a single plane you see the route that your car takes. Now think of 1,300 such levels connecting stuff under the ground, which is gas pipelines, water, optic fiber, on the land and above the land in terms of transmission towers, etc., etc. So it's a 1,300 layer, very, very powerful software, which is, I suppose, iconic in its development. I do not think any other country in the world has such a powerful program developed by a Sarkari outfit, lesser known. Everybody knows ISRO and many other very well-known government establishments, but this is the Bhaskaracharya National Institute for Space Applications and Geoinformatics, located between Ahmedabad and Gandhinagar, which has developed this phenomenal platform called Gati Shakti. What Gati Shakti does, it maps all linkages in what it calls an economic node. So forget the jargon economic node, take a city, let's take a city like Kanpur. What Gati Shakti will do is it will take Kanpur and map all the connectivities that lead into Kanpur, roads below the ground, on the ground, above the ground, and show the interrelationships between all the connectivities. So that is one phenomenal program that is being put to use. I am personally aware that the Gati Shakti platform has been used very successfully to take a look at project planning, the determination of alignments for roads and irrigation canals, for accepting or rejecting projects, and for putting connectivities between various infrastructure projects. That a port is built, road and rail connectivity, but I could go on and on about Gati Shakti, but that's to give you a flavor of connect. And the last bucket is utilization. In utilization, I think the biggest driver we have now is the National Logistics Plan, NLP, which seeks to bring down Indian logistics costs from 13% to 8%. India today ranks number 44 in the World Bank's study of logistics efficiency, and the aspiration is to certainly quickly bring it to number 10. So the NLP, which was launched in September 2022, National Logistics Plan, has at its core 5 deliverables. One is that the railways share is going to go up from 28 to 40, that multimodal logistics plans are going to be set up, that unutilized potential, particularly inland water transport, coastal shipping and liquid bulk transport through pipelines are going to be put into motion. Special focus plans for 15 industries that move bulk cargo like cement, iron ore, coal, petroleum, fertilizers, etc. Very, very specific tailored plans for the logistics movements of 15 industries. And finally, digital integration. Now, digital integration is very important because today there are platforms that IT has created, but they are standalone platforms. So Railways has a platform, Customs has a platform, the Electricity Board has a platform, ports have a platform, airports have a platform. So what NLP does is that there is already a program in place called ULIP, which is the Unified Logistics Interface Platform, that's actually going to be the mother platform for all logistics tracking across multimodal systems. So that is the heart over and above the other 5 things that I mentioned. So to summarize, the infra lens of looking at competitiveness builders for the economy are across these 3 buckets: build, connect, utilize. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinayak. And now can I request Mukundan?
Thank you, Dinesh. I think let me just move forward from where Vinayak left us. It's a delight that you spoke about Gati Shakti and ULIP, Vinayak, because both of these were developed with some of us working during the COVID times. It tells you the power and speed of what we can do if we work together. I'll just take a step back and say, if you look at competitiveness, let's say in your 100 years, when India's 100 years are there, I think first element which I would like to sort of highlight is around what I call sustainable. Are we building sustainable future? And I'm very positive about it because we are in a very unique position. India is in a very unique position. No other top 10 economies in the world have this opportunity which India has, because 80% of India is yet to be built. Now the fundamental, which means if India has got to go 4 times by 2050 and then you say 80% of India is to be built, we can build it differently. And I think that opportunity the industry must seize, and we must build it green, and India is very competitive. If you look at green hydrogen, for example, we've done a complete benchmarking of which is the most competitive place to make. I think India comes very close to Australia and Saudi Arabia, and we can be right up there in terms of being the most competitive place to do stuff in a very sustainable manner. The thing which gives me huge confidence is our 20% we achieved with the highest population, what our GDP number is today, which is 20% has been delivered, but 80% yet to be done. That 20% we've done with the highest human population, highest cattle population, yet we are the most bio-rich country in the world. No other country is so bio-rich, so I think people don't really sort of appreciate the kind of complexity we've dealt with, and I'm pretty sure, pretty confident that we can deal with this going forward. But for that, industry has to step up, industry has to think differently, and we cannot build the plants the way we built before, we cannot build our operations the way we built before, so we need more innovation, more entrepreneurship. That takes me to the second piece, which is around what will make this competitiveness work. It is about innovation, it is about what I call connected digital, what Dinesh spoke about, and again, I feel very confident because of the huge talent we have. We are the talent of the world, talent factory of the world, and I think we must harness it for India's good, and there are tremendous use cases. If you look at what Vinayak spoke, there were only 2 use cases, but I can tell you 1,000 use cases which we have come across in India where we are actually doing it much better than the rest. You take about our own, not only about our digital payment, but look at our own income tax portal. I think it is unique in the world. if you log into the US income tax portal and compare that with India, I think India is like 3-4 generations ahead of in terms of where we need to be. So we have to appreciate the pace at which the work has been done. And really, I think there's a huge opportunity for us to sort of interlink these different islands of excellence and create a new excellence which is fully connected. The last piece is about, if you do these two well, I think India will be extremely competitive. I can only say, when we did a benchmarking for chemical sector, where I'll come down to now micro picture rather than at macro picture, we found we were 7% not competitive as best in the world in terms of cost structure. And that 7% broke up into 3.5% broadly on logistics and 3.5% on power and energy. I think power and energy is a big issue in India. I think we've got to solve this problem. We've got to solve this problem even as we decarbonize our power sector. The whole issue of state electricity board, the non-payment of dues, and the whole issue of the cash cycle of that. I think government has announced scheme after scheme, but it's something which we need to sort of solve. And it's a big policy issue. It is not a technology issue. So I think that is something which I will not go into now. And if we solve that, I'm pretty sure that as far as energy is concerned, India will be as competitive as the rest of the world. But there is a switch. There's an issue here. As we move towards sustainability, there are 3 pillars of sustainability which we sort of, in our decarbonization portfolio. One is energy efficiency. Everybody will become more efficient. It pays for itself. Second is fuel switch. India, unfortunately, does not have natural gas as a fuel switch. And I think we've got to think differently there. I think we've got to think about our bioresources and also up the game in nuclear, especially with respect to SMRs. A lot of discussion is happening at the policy level in terms of how do we make SMRs, small modular reactors, more accessible, and how do we address the civil liability issue. But I think if we cross these 2 hunts by 2050, I think we would have solved for the big issue on power. The second one is, of course, logistics. I think here, Vinayak, you spoke about railroad ratio. Our railroad ratio is 80% as a company today. But the real issue is our US operation is 100%. So how do we up the game to get to that we get into those bulk modes of transportation, the more efficient modes of transportation, less carbon intensive modes of transportation, including the use of our coastal waterways. You spoke about rail, but I think it's a big opportunity for us to sort of move in that direction. So I think the pieces to address the competitiveness of India by when we are at 2047 are all there, but they must embrace sustainability and industry must step up. They must embrace innovation and industry must step up. For example, our R&D spend today is abysmally low number as far as each one of us is concerned. We are all culprits. We need to sort of move in that direction. And lastly, we have to address some of these niggling policy issues. Government has made several attempts, but I think we need to keep going at it. We can't feel disappointed, despondent, because sometimes the magic formula will arrive at some point in time. If you look at direct benefit transfer, we suffered for years on how do we transfer subsidy to individuals. But moment comes and then direct benefit transfer happens and then the case is solved. So even in the case of, let's say, a power sector or logistics, I think we got to keep at it and we will find a solution. So 3 pillars, Dinesh, to your question: sustainable, innovation, connected, and then finally continued focus on 2 big issues which plague us, and we need to find a solution.
Thank you, Mukundan. Very good summary. As I said, we'll keep the comments for the questions for later. So can I now request Kamal, please?
Thank you, Dinesh. And I think after those very important points made by Vinayak and Mukundan, I think I want to start by saying that India is in the global spotlight, not only because of its economic performance or GDP growth. I think it is also because it has demonstrated tremendous resilience over the last 4 to 5 years. And I think that's something which is standing out. And the nature and scale of transformation has been huge during this period, whether it is infrastructure, which Vinayak talked about, or structural reforms on ease of doing business, on several reforms which have come into play. So I think this is really helping us in a big way. But if we were to decode the underlying common thread amongst what's happened in India, I think it is the use of digital tools, which has been really the hallmark of the India story. And I think, to me, that is very, very encouraging. That sets a very good pace for the future. Now, if we were to talk about our competitiveness blueprint for India at 100, it would not be merely about economically competitiveness, but I think also about being inclusive and improving the quality of life of 1.4 billion people. That's where the real competitiveness will come in. And I think the productivity levels of Indians, which is today low, which I think Christo will talk about, I think all these issues will get answered to a large extent when we do that. Clearly, what India has several intrinsic factors that are working together for our advantage, whether it is demographics, digitally savvy workforce, democracy, decisive and reforms-oriented government, growing and aspirational middle income group, commitment to decarbonize. I think all are these positives. But the road ahead does not come without challenges of creating 10 million jobs per year, mismatch between new jobs and the skill sets, that's a huge challenge. Inequitable growth, I think that's something which again is, whether it is gender or region or ethnicity, I think all of those. Scaling up challenges of MSMEs. The biggest challenge India faces when it comes to manufacturing is how do we scale up our MSMEs? And I think that's very important. Implementation of policies on ground and so on and so forth. There are policies which do not get disseminated down to the ground level, and I think that's another challenge which probably over a period of time we need to solve that. But coming very quickly to the blueprint, I have 7 or 8 points to make. Very, very quickly, in the interest of time, I will just talk about the main key points, a lot of which have already been talked about. I think, and my reference is more towards manufacturing. And I think, so Indian businesses, beyond the large companies can fend for themselves, need to build scale. And I think that's the key. And manufacturing excellence. That has to be in our cultural, that has to be the new DNA. How do we build scale? And I think this is where our MSMEs tend to falter. They do very well up to a particular point, and when they need to scale, that is when they start faltering. And this is a challenge which we need to, challenge of competitiveness. And why MSMEs is so important? Because 85% of the employment is coming through MSMEs. The large companies can be just the anchor companies, but the real action happens at MSMEs. So that's the first challenge. And to me, we need to have a very, very clear framework on that. CII has done a lot of work. We can share offline sometimes. Very, very clear 3 pillars of domestic ecosystem, where we're talking of ease of doing business, speed of doing business, cost of doing business, which Dinesh also alluded to. The second pillar is firm level competitiveness. So what do we do? CII has centers of excellence which can help the MSMEs to really do much, much better on that. So whether it is the quality, whether it is branding, go-to-market strategy, whether it is capacity building or sustainability issues, all of those, firm level. And the third piece is, third pillar is the global competitiveness, global ecosystem where market access opportunities to all of us, I know. So those are the things. The second piece, which is very important, is every metric what we use need to measure, include social progress and diversity indices. This is very, very important, because going forward, if we do not include women in our workforce, I think we are running on one leg. We will not be able to compete. So I think that's the second piece. The third is culture of learning and upskilling and getting new skills. We are living in a world where there's always a moving goalpost. The skills of today will become outdated very soon. So the culture of perpetual learning, a learning organization is going to be important. That's the third piece. The fourth is we need to get a fix on the focus sectors. It could be the existing sectors, it could be the emerging sectors, and it could be the sunrise sectors. So we need to deal with all 3 sectors in a different way. It's not one size fit all. So it's going to be very different there. The fifth is, as a nation, we need to pursue conscious leadership, as Mukundan said, on sustainability and green economy by building the matching energy, digital and physical infrastructure. So I think that's going to be the fifth piece. And the sixth is building our economy on regional strengths and value propositions of local areas. I think that's another very important point. We are a very diverse country. while we cannot offer one market, that's also a challenge because every different state has different value propositions. So I think that is another thing which we need to look at. The seventh is, which I think Vinayak has already alluded to some extent, is focus on cities infrastructure. More than 50% of our population will be in cities, and 80% of value addition in the country will happen in the cities. So we need to really ensure that our cities are not decongested, our cities are not bulging on the seams. I think all of this needs to be, and that is where a lot of infrastructure and Gati Shakti program will come good way. And the eighth piece is, we have a habit of working in silos. And I think that world is gone. The period of working in silos is dead. We will need to work with collective intelligence, whether it is in companies, whether it is in governance. So logistics will have to look at every aspect. For instance, logistics will have to look at whether it is by road, by air, by water, by sea, or anything. So I think we need to have a uniform, a one single umbrella ministry or maybe a department which looks at it from that lens. And finally, the other things, of course, we talked about technology and digitization. I think the two other things which I want to talk about is establishing brand India. And I think this is very, very important. And I think, and brand India, what should it stand for? I think it should stand for a trusted partner based on quality, fairness, speed, and transparency. And I think these are some things which is missing. And there is a huge, huge position available for this branding, this sort of a branding, where people are looking at countries who they can trust. Emerging countries we can trust. And I think India stands a very good chance, provided we tick so many other boxes which I've talked about. And finally, the quality agenda has to be back on the high tables. The agenda, I mean, there was a huge quality movement, and CII was one of the institutions which started this movement in the 80s. I think that quality movement has to come back at board level agenda. And I think that's something very, very important. So with this, I think these are some of the imperatives which can take us to a position which we'll all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you so much. Now, over to you, Doctor, for taking us through your view on where we stand in the competitiveness index.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here. Let me see whether the slides, do I start the slides or are they going to be
it's come
there? You know, as every academic,
it's on.
I cannot work without slides. I remember my kids used to say when they were younger that sometimes when I was speaking to them, it's like, Dad, you are missing your slides. So here we are. Okay.
You can see here.
So I will try to provide the context very, very briefly, that maybe we can think some of these excellent ideas, actually, that were addressed by the panel, and also maybe try to figure out where should we look for addressing the challenges that we have. So, okay, yes, but can you see? Okay. Okay, great. So what we do at the World Competitiveness Center is actually we try to evaluate how 63 economies perform with respect to competitiveness, which means how these economies use their sources, their competencies, in order to create sustainable value, and therefore increase the prosperity of its citizens. The main idea is that we have 4 different factors. In order for an economy to be competitive, you need to have an efficient government that builds essentially the framework within which the private sector needs to create value. Therefore, you need a business sector which is efficient. And the higher the levels of infrastructure, the higher the efficiency of both sectors, and all this translates into some economic KPIs. Right? The important issue is how can we find, and this is what the rankings offer, a way to compare and contrast in different dimensions. So what I have here is the 15 countries that ranked the highest last year in 2022, and India that ranked 37, a little bit less than the average country for our ranking. So how can we compare? Are there things that actually are similar in the countries that rank the highest? And as you can imagine, the pandemic gave us a very nice way of trying to see what some of these things are. And we saw that the countries that actually are ranked very highly, they have certain characteristics. They have the capacity of technology to be able, for instance, to very effectively do certain things remotely. They have a government which is efficient and therefore can stimulate the economy very, very fast. They have the healthcare system that allows to control the spread and give help. And, not surprisingly, if one thinks about it, you need a strong societal framework. You need a cohesive society. You need some of the things that we were discussing before, inclusion, equality of opportunities, and so on and so forth. How did India rank fare on that? Actually, it had different numbers, and you can see from the position of the country that the area where the Indian economy can improve upon is actually the healthcare capacity, the health and the environment that we were discussing before about sustainability. And one may think, where can India rely in order to be able to address that? Well, actually, in one issue that can rely is what is doing best, which is technology, the technological infrastructure. So let me give you a broader picture. This is all the data that we have, about 250 variables, and we have different sub-factors. And the important aspect of this exercise is that one can immediately see what are the strengths of the economy, right? With respect to factors, the business efficiency is obviously the strongest. And not only that, it has improved from last year from the 32nd position to the 23rd. What is the area that there is a lot of room for improvement? Infrastructure, that was discussed before. And in fact, the idea of build, connect, and utilize comes very, very handy here in order to do that. One, just by seeing the ranking, can immediately identify what may be the very big challenges. And you're not going to be surprised to see that these challenges actually are the ones that this conference tried to address. Like, for instance, the issue that many other economies face, inflationary pressure, the issue of high debt deficits, right? There are issues related to the societal framework, we discussed that before, and also with the productivity of the private sector. How can we increase the output per employee per hour? This is an extremely important issue. And finally, and you have recognized that already, we spoke about the healthcare. The environmental aspect is a very important issue, and this was brought up before, education. Where can the Indian economy rely in order to solve these issues? By the way, every time that we have a challenge, either we're speaking about an economy or a particular company, or even in our personal lives, the very first important issue is to be aware of the challenge that we face. And I think the CII, just by viewing the composition of the conference, is acutely aware of what the issues at hand are. How can we solve them, which is the second very big issue that we always ask? Well, rely in our strengths. And you see, what do we have here? Well, we have within the economic performance, international trade is extremely important. International investment, the FDI, is increasing every year, right? This is how we can finance a number of different innovative ideas. Very importantly, and now just to put things in perspective, the FDIs, we should see it in a very close relationship with inflation, because these things sometimes are not going together, as you know better than I do. Another issue, take advantage of what the business efficiency offers. Take advantage, for instance, the cost efficiency that exists in the labor market, where Indian economy performs very, very well. Take advantage of the finance structure that actually India is very good position. And also, the last two, the last two sub-factors are related on how executives are actually trying to evaluate themselves. And what we see is that there is a tremendous positive sentiment in the business environment. And we know very well how things, from a behavioral point of view, drive that. And finally, last and not least, the technology and scientific infrastructure. This is an extremely important issue. How can we actually perform on that? Well, I'll tell you. All of us know that it's very nice to know numbers for a particular year. But all of us also know that we don't get the complete picture. So what I did was I included information for the last 5 years. And I would like to leave everyone with this very positive picture that I see, which is that you see that the overall, the red curve is actually increasing. The economic performance, of course, the purple line, of course, had a very big drop in 2020. We had the pandemic after all, but nevertheless, after that, it started moving upwards. What has helped? Actually, the business environment, the business efficiency has helped a lot. As the government efficiency as well, it remains a little bit more constant, but it's definitely improving. And finally, infrastructure is the area where Indian economy needs to improve a lot. But if we take a look in the last 5 years, we see that actually India is in the right path. What do we need to make sure that it happens? That we continue these very positive effects and we continue in this path. And with that note, I thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And obviously, you have given a lot of potential for questions with a thought-provoking presentation. But thank you for sharing that information. So I think we have about 15 minutes for questions. So maybe, yes, please. Mike? Yeah. Please introduce yourself and ask the question.
A very good afternoon. My name is Jyoti Pradhan. I'm the CEO at Kurlon. We are the mattress of India. And we plan to bring the comfort of a Kurlon to every human being on the planet and beyond. So my question here is that of an identity. If you see how developed countries have brought in revenue, grown their industry, it is one feeds the other. What industry invests in, that's what becomes the identity of the country. Let me explain a little bit. Germany is known for engineering, Japanese for quality, Swiss for precision, US for innovation, French for design. What should India's identity be? What should Indian companies start doing today so global consumers aspire for Indian brands? Open to the entire panel.
Who wants to take it first, Kamal?
Yeah, I can. I think there is a very clear position for India, which is on value. I think the value which India brings to the table with our cost structure and with the capabilities which we have built over the years. And if we have a little bit of a greater quality focus, there's a very, very clear position for India to be seen as a value provider, as a country where brands are value providers. So it may not be German precision or German quality, or may not be Chinese price, but it is maybe somewhere in between. And I think there's a huge, huge position vacant for that. This is to my mind, yeah.
Maybe I'll just add one comment to that. See, if you look at the Life 360, which the Prime Minister spoke about, in my mind is a true Indian value. So what Kamal said, I think if I just add that to position it as where you are frugal in your thinking, you are not wasting things, but at the same time, you are equally conscious and aware that growth is essential for an individual. So I think if you place that across as a business parameter, and any product or any service which you provide becomes that. I think you have? Good.
This kind of a seminar and conferences, we think a lot of intellect, lot of things are there. But when we see on the implementation side and go to the village, to the last pyramid of the society, you find a big difference in our deliberation, talking still. The lowest level is far away from these benefits. And again, we talk about value. I take the value from a different angle. At least in India, 2008, everything fall, but the saving money by our household people sustain that kind of fall in entire world. So now we are talking about governance, we are talking about compliance, which has got a cost. But the value which the Indian family had, we are copying the best, and in process, what we used to provide just free of cost, just like that with other family, that is missing, and somewhere there is no balancing between the capacity building, infrastructure creating, and the ultimate benefit of the society.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would say as an individual, because I would like to break this down to individual level and then at a firm level and at the country level. I think we can't have a discussion like this and say, what did you learn? So let us say the message was, let's say what Kamal spoke about, let's say, are you bringing products which are very deep in value, which means you're producing at 1/10 the cost, you're giving the same quality, but at a scale which is 100 times the scale, because the population is large, market is large. I think at an individual level, I think we got to think about how we can add value to that process, whatever we may be. Even an engineer, an accountant, can we do that? But at the firm level, to go back and think about it takes a lot of time. And I think each one of us, if we take even one lesson out of a conference like this and deliver it on the ground in our place, I think we would have moved the needle. As far as the government is concerned, I think institutions like CII, that's the importance, where large-scale inputs come, and large-scale inputs go to government to make that shift, policy shift in terms of what we ought to be doing. And I can give you many glimpses of world-class service at cost which nobody has done. Today, you're sitting in the room, and each one has a mobile phone, and I can tell you the data and voice cost in India is one of the lowest in the world. And it's been delivered through a policy intervention by government, by private sector taking up the capability. And I want to tell you, the companies which are there, while some of them may have financial difficulties, but most of them are doing fine today. So we have done it in multiple sectors, and I think Vinayak spoke about infrastructure. So I'm not saying it's a job done well, but we have a lot to do in future. But I have a great hope in what we've done up till now to say that the same value you spoke about in the previous generation, we are actually building it better, even better with the talent which is coming on stream. I meet youngsters now. I can tell you, if we were as sagacious as they are today, we would have built even better. So I'm really, really confident of what we're going to do. So I go away from a session like this with a question which you asked to say, you've triggered a thought, I need to get back and do something differently. And also as an industry, I think we all have a job. So when we sit together, we need to engage with policymakers to move the needle. So we'll do it. I think the point is valid.
Yes, thank you. And just to add to Mr. Mukudan and Mr. Bali said, from the perspective of the broader economy, I think that one can see, for instance, came in mind, that the value of exports of ITC services in India is increasing tremendously substantially. And last year, it was within the first 10 positions. And if you take the perspective that executives are bringing in all this issue, you will see that the transition, the digital transformation of the companies, and this goes both for the large companies but also the SMEs, is also increasing and extremely positive, which means that the tools that can improve quality and also networking within an integrated world are attempted to be taken into consideration.
Good afternoon all. My name is Bill Shukla. I come from Ahmedabad. We make injection molding machines by the name Milacron India Private Limited. My question was to Mr. Mukundan, if you can elaborate a little bit on, you spoke about hydrogen, and my biggest worry right now is that we all want to go on that green path, but the cost of having that hydrogen at a cost where we remain the value provider to the world, what Mr. Kamal Bali said, how is that going to happen? And where is the finance going to come from? For us to say that we have truly made green steel, green cement, green fertilizer. So is it something that is like a wish list? Is it ever going to happen for a country where we are placed demographically and income-wise and GDP-wise with respect to the European market, for example? Thank you.
A very good question. I think if you recall, I mentioned there are 3 buckets to deal with the problem. One is here and now. Here and now, when you say, I think it is not possible, I think it's going to be a challenge. Where to sit down? So the issue here and now, I think what pays for itself is efficiency. What pays for itself is making sure we are, making sure the waste is reduced, circularity, things like that. Where I think the return on investment is almost infinity because it makes you more competitive. It reduces your cost. If you look at any plant operating, I'm talking about manufacturing, we have motors which have been installed 50 years ago. If I change with a variable speed drive, immediately pays back itself in about 2 years' time. So there are opportunities in efficiency which I think industry needs to embrace and put it in place so that our consumption of energy and power comes down. The second one I spoke about is fuel switch. The fuel switch is not going to happen to hydrogen overnight. So I fully agree with you. I think fundamentally it's going to be to the options I suggested what India needs to do in terms of use of biomass immediately, but also looking to not just hybrid power where solar and wind is available in India at prices which are very, very competitive. But I think we also need to invest in other technology like SMR, which small modular reactors. These will give the base load. We have to decarbonize. There's no way out of this decarbonization process. So I think there's a lot of work going on, both in policy circles as well as within the industry to build these capabilities today. They are not commercial scale, but they will get there. Solar and wind certainly are. And lastly, about this whole issue of green hydrogen, I think electrolyzer problem, everybody knows. Lots of companies are working on it. And I think it's a matter of scale. There's a complete pathway of how to get to that scale of, let's say, $1 per ton of hydrogen. I think that whole pathway which we want to build, I think it's been broken down to multiple steps. You're absolutely right. It is not ready today. But if we have to get that done by 2050, we have to get on the bus today. Because the bus is moving, and I think we need to be on the bus. And we've got a great opportunity. 3 most competitive places in the world for green hydrogen: Saudi Arabia, Australia, India. I think we are there. I mean, there are neighbors too. I mean, if you look at the Indo-Pacific, Saudi Arabia, India, and Australia are there. I think 3 most competitive places to make green hydrogen. I think we should grab the opportunity. Maybe we should work with Saudi Arabia, with Australia to build this ecosystem.
I just wanted to add to that. I mean, I think you would have heard the previous session where there was a lot of debate on funding for transition. So if you look at new technologies and do we have a solution in place, I don't think anybody in the world has actually got a solution in place for the full funding required for a complete transition to new mobility solutions. So I think that's a journey which every country is going to go through. So I think Mukundan's point is even more valid, that as long as India can take the lead and being the most competitive, I think it will place us in, I would call it the lead position going forward rather than be the follower position.
Dilip Dua, Krishna Hydro Projects Private Limited. My question is future frontiers, competitiveness, technology, sustainability, internalization, what is there? And Mr. Mukundan, you are part of the environment. How do you take the India when it's going to be 100, what you're talking, with the wastage? How do you really handle the waste which is accumulating and the utilization of the waste, and how do you address that? Because everywhere the growth story is there, build, connect, transform, transpire, transparency. But how do you really get the waste up?
So I have a very quick answer to that. I think there are 3 pillars to sustainability. One is, of course, decarbonization. The second one, which we as an industry have framed, is around circularity. third one is biodiversity. I'm not going to go there. That's a big field. India is doing a lot of work in that. In terms of circularity, I think we all, as each company at firm level, at industry level, and here is where collaboration is critical, because my waste may be somebody's input. So we need to work together in that whole, and I think several industries have made a lot of progress. For example, we supply to glass sector. Glass sector today does recycling of glass, which is massive. I think it's almost 30-40% today. Can we scale that up to higher? My business of supplying virgin material will go down, but I have to enable them to move in that direction. You talk about electric battery. Again, I think there is not, we say lithium shortage, material shortage. I think the recycling is the solution. So a lot of companies are investing, including if you look at steel. In steel sector, for example, the scrap steel with electric arc furnace is one part of the solution for them to decarbonize as they move. Of course, the blast furnace will go to green hydrogen, but also can we recycle steel? So in all these metals and minerals, I think that's a base character. So we have to be very conscious that circularity is at the center of what we do. In fact, it's a business opportunity. Those in the room who can think beyond their business into saying, how do I bring the whole thing into circularity? You'd be sitting on a gold mine of, let's say, revenue, profits, and margin. It's out there to be grabbed. So I'm extremely positive. The same point which you said is waste. Actually, in my mind, it's dollars and rupees and whatever dinars, whatever you want to call.
A question for you, Professor. That's why I preface by saying the panelists may ask questions of others as well. If you look at from a competitiveness study, I guess this is coming out of various surveys which you connect, right? But is there any benchmark data which can actually show this? And when I'm talking about, let us say, infra utilization, because you have put infrastructure here, but is utilization also one of the norms which are getting tracked in the competitiveness index? Yes. Infrastructure, because I think Vinayak also made the same point, I also made the same point. Because if you look at countries which are developing, the biggest challenge is how do we make sure we utilize what we have? I mean, you know of a neighboring country of ours where there is a beautiful airport built, and I think one flight a day comes out of it. So that's a very different issue.
This is a very good point, and it's a fair point. There is not absolute measures which can be reached. So,
sorry, I think you should face the mic. I think
so. Exactly. So,
Professor, you have to face the mic. You can't hear.
Yes, of course. I'm sorry. So what I was saying is that there are not absolute values that signify a particular benchmark. Because there is not one size fits all. Each economy has certain capacity already built. It places a vision and essentially chooses the strategy to reach that particular vision, and then tries to use comparative advantage to the resources and competencies that it has more in abundance. What we find and what the position of India is in our ranking is relative. It is relative to the 63 other economies that we evaluate. So everything related with infrastructure is relative to the other 63 economies that we have under consideration. And then you find approximately the position that an economy is. That's why looking at the trend and actually rely in longer periods of time points out whether a particular strategy used goes towards the mission. So if the mission, for instance, is to increase education, a pillar for competitiveness according to us, of course, this will be reflected vis-a-vis the rest of the economies. And this is the important factor.
Sorry, I have a question for you.
Please.
You know, as an economist studying competitiveness and rankings, for people like us who receive the output, there is a certain amount of confusion in our minds. The World Economic Forum brings out the Global Competitiveness Report. Your institution is bringing out this study. and the World Bank has withdrawn its global rankings amidst very serious controversy. So there are many such methods and formats floating around. Among economists, do you see any convergence on having one standardized measure?
This is an excellent question. The quick answer is no. There's not, for two reasons. First, because you know economists. They are on the one hand and then on the other hand, and therefore it's very, very difficult to converge. But more seriously, the issue is that we are trying to evaluate an extremely complex environment, which means that in the end, what you measure, what you will receive as an outcome, is a function of the things that you decide to measure. What do we usually do as economists who study different rankings? We try to see very carefully what exactly are the variables that are included, because these say two things. It says what exactly is the purpose of the ranking, what is the scope. It also says what it does not measure, and this is extremely important. For instance, in our measurement, we use two types of data. We use hard data, and we also use perception data. And we get the perception data from a lengthy survey. Many of you maybe receive these from us, where you respond to 90 questions, where it's basically tried to get an idea whether the framework that the government builds works for the participants in the markets, right? Here, we do not, for instance, ask many other stakeholders of the economy that are extremely important. For instance, the workers in an area, or the students of higher education, who are the future thing, because we feel that competitiveness, the way that we measure it, is from the point of view of the business sector. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but it is very, very important to separate what it says and what it doesn't.
Thank you. So I think with that, let me bring this very interesting session to a conclusion. I know there is no conclusion, honestly, for a subject as diverse as developing competitiveness over the next 25 years. But I think what you heard from the panelists is, I would call it a very good summary of the ingredients which I think we will have to put together to make the recipe for success going forward. And I think in a way, I think with the competitiveness index which we saw, it does show the progress which we can make. And while all of us may have different views on how to approach it, and like you said, Professor, I think it's not so easy to make it into one comprehensive, I would call it measurable index. We will still keep hoping that whichever index we look at, India will continue to improve, so that by competitiveness at 100, we are really amongst the top 10, if I can take that plunge ahead to look at. Having said that, I think the three elements which I think were common across all the four panelists are, how do we make sure that we create value out of everything that India is going to do, whether it be from the business perspective or whether it be from the social infrastructure perspective, and last but not, I would say the most important would be to make sure that every human being actually benefits from the development of this competitiveness for India at 100. So I think with that positive message, let me close by thanking everyone, all the panelists, for making this a very engaging session, and look forward to carrying forward what Mukundan said of implementing a few of these ideas going forward in the years ahead. Thank you.